is Annie Cooper here with Jason Prall. We're going to be talking about human longevity. So I want to start with kind of what you do, your background, your research, and things like that.
My background's actually in engineering, so
Wow.
that's really where I came from, is mechanical engineering. And then, through my own health challenges, I transitioned into integrative health, functional medicine, this type of thing, where we run lab tests and functional and integrative testing to figure out what the root cause of chronic disease is. And that was sort of where I stayed for a while. And then in that process, there came this transition point where I realized that there was too much of my time dedicated to figuring out disease problems and even getting to the root cause. That's great. But what I realized people needed more of was this understanding of how to live a healthy lifestyle.
Yes.
And this was a little easier or a little bit more intuitive, I guess, 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But in our modern world, where we are, bathed in this fluorescent indoor lighting, we rarely go outside. We barely touch the earth anymore.
Sure.
We are, immersed in traffic and stress and all this stuff. There has to be a more conscious and mindful way that we go about living our life if we want to be healthy long term and maintain some sort of balance. So that's really kind of where I am today, is more in this education space of what is it in our modern world that we need to be doing and be more mindful of to induce health and to maintain health, as opposed to trying to figuring out how to solve disease after it arrives.
So what do you think we can do to live longer lives? Because I feel like people, like when they go to the doctor, for example, and they're prescribed all these medications and they say, okay, we think this is what's wrong with you. I'm really interested in that because it kind of bothers me. I feel like you don't have to just take a medication. There's so many other things that you can do.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think here's the first thing. So, it's interesting when we talk about long life.
Yeah.
But really the point of our life is not to accumulate years, right? I mean, if you live to 150 and most of your life or all of your life you hate yourself and you're destroying the planet and you have no good relationships and you have no meaning here, then what's the point of living 150 years? Yet, if you lived 38 years and you lived every day with passion and love and joy and this immense excitement about life, to me that's a little bit more meaningful. So first, I think the qualitative aspect of life is the most important. Now, assuming that that's your path and you're on this planet to live in that way that I just described, then all of a sudden, living a longer life becomes more meaningful. So I think that's the first place we have to start, which is to say that today's the only day that ever matters, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we can think about the future and plan for it and try to optimize sort of our trajectory, but at the end of the day, we only have today. And so I think if we can operate more in the moment, that's a great place to start. So forgetting about all the past crap that we take with us, right? We're lugging all this garbage with us emotionally from the past that is no longer needed, and we're worrying about the future, right? This is essentially the definition of depression and anxiety. Anxiety is thinking about the future. Depression is worrying about the past. So we need to sort of think about that in terms of where does our mind space occupy? Does it occupy here in the present? That's where we really want to be, and that's arguably the most important place to start if we want to talk about living a long, healthy life. So I think just embracing the day, and then there's a million things that we can do. But I would say the easy, short answer is to live in a more simple way. So right now we are wrapped up in complexity. We overcomplicate our lives, which adds stress, which adds extra chemicals, which adds all this stuff that we really don't need, that is not adding to the value of actual life itself, let alone to physical, emotional, mental health. So I think if we can decomplexify, we can simplify our life, get back to the things that really make us happy, then that is probably the most overarching way I can say that we can be healthy in the long term, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to what are the things that actually make us healthy and happy. And if you look around the world, it is not more iPhones and better TVs and more money. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And what we tend to see is that the more we gear towards sort of our Western civilization in terms of acquiring things, it often tends to lead and correlate more with unhappiness and unhealthy lives. So I think we have to sort of get back into balance and in tune to who we really are and what we're really here to do. And it doesn't involve a lot of those things we think.
So you think a lot of actual health comes from your brain, basically what you're thinking.
Absolutely. I think your mindset. So the way that you think and emote in this world. So how do I think about myself? How do I feel about myself? How do I feel and think about those around me, right? If I'm and this translates into what we say and do as well, right? The things that we say and do ultimately come from how we think and feel. So if I'm feeling a certain way, in fact, I can actually create this reality of the world, which is dangerous and scary and awful and all this bad luck actually happens because I'm actually creating this.
Yeah.
So what we actually see, and the research has shown this, is that the lens that we look through into the world is the lens that mirrors the way we feel inside. In other words, we will create this reality that justifies how I feel. So if I feel like the world is a dangerous place, it's every man for himself, nothing good ever happens to me, what do you think is going to project out in the world, and what do you think I'm going to attract? In fact, that's exactly what has to happen, because I have to justify, it has to match. There has to be this coherence with how I feel and what is presented to me.
Exactly.
So we have to, I think, first change the way we think and feel, and recognize that some of it is coming from patterns, mostly from childhood, developmental issues that come from childhood, because my father left, or my uncle beat me, or I was adopted, or all these types of things, or even maybe I wasn't breastfed for very long because mother had something going on, and there was this emotional disconnect that at 6 months old I didn't know how to deal with, and so there are these things develop in us, and so these patterns and these protective mechanisms that come with us. So a lot of this stuff that we would term as sort of bad or negative with regard to our emotions and our mental framework actually are just patterns. They're protective patterns that we take with us. So I think just being aware of that and finding a way to move through that, and there's lots of techniques, and it can be a little bit of work, but as we get rid of that and change our worldview and change the way we think and feel, all of a sudden the things that we say and the things that we do start to change. And a lot of this has to do with self-worth. In fact, I would argue that it's the biggest problem we have, is that most of us feel like we're not worthy. And we're not aware of that we don't feel that way. Sometimes we think we are, but I think most people aren't fully aware that how much worth they have and how much they really deserve love. And if we can acknowledge that and accept that, all of a sudden everything we do changes. We're not going to be getting smashed on Friday night and waking up hungover. We're not going to be doing these detrimental things. We're going to be actually operating from a standpoint of love and compassion for ourselves and for those around us. So I think it kind of always starts with ourselves and typically with our patterns. And all of a sudden, when we can analyze and understand the way we think and feel, then everything around us changes.
So do you think social media has a lot to do with this, with the whole self-worth thing?
I think it's huge new addition to this problem. I think it's been going on for a while, with magazines, with movies, with the projection of the media. But social media itself is just taking this to the nth degree. I mean, it is so difficult now. And, there's all kinds of studies. In fact, the founders of a lot of these organizations will tell you it's exactly what they were designed to do, is create these dopamine hits, right?
It's crazy, right?
And this addictive thing. And then you find that, you're rewarding people for taking all kinds of action and doing these crazy behaviors on social media, which then exacerbate the problem. So social media is a big problem, but in and of itself, it doesn't have to be. Social media is not a bad thing. It's really about how we're using it and the reward systems that are sort of inbuilt to these things. So I think we just have to adjust our framework and the way we relate to this stuff and use it. And if we can do so in a healthy way, then it can be a very, very good thing, because there's so much positive, I think, that can come from it.
There is connections and things like that.
Yeah.
So going back to the whole changing your mindset thing, a lot of people adopt meditation as a way to do this. Do you think that's a very important thing to do? I
think it can be. I think there is no one way that I think people need to approach this, and there's no one fix. Meditation is fantastic, and there's a million ways to meditate. I think exploring different types of meditation is fantastic. My favorite happens to be Vipassana, which is essentially this way of meditating where you're just you're bringing your awareness to what is. That's it. You're not thinking about anything. There's no mantras. There's no nothing. You're just bringing your awareness to simply what is. And it's a very great way for me to basically shut things down, because we're overstimulated in so many ways. So I love that style. There's so many other ways, and I think meditation is a fantastic thing to do. There's other things like yoga, which in and of itself is a moving meditation. Right. People don't think about it that way in the West, because it has turned into this sweat fest or body sculpting practice,
right.
or even sort of flexibility contest. But really what it is a moving meditation. And so to connect with the breath, right? So there's breathwork practices like holotropic breathwork, which is fantastic for releasing traumas and things like that. So there's so many tools and techniques that we can use. I mean, even to things like plant medicines, which are now becoming this new emerging sort of thing that people are looking into, even to the point where Johns Hopkins is now recommending things like psilocybin to look at things like depression and anxiety as solutions. So there's a lot of new emerging things that I think we need to look at But I'm a huge fan of all the Eastern practices, whether it's Qigong, meditation, the martial arts of all kinds. I think hold a lot of value, particularly here in the West, because we are so fast-paced, we are overstimulated. So we need to bring in more of the, of the yin, right? The yang is like sort of this masculine,
right.
Go, go, go. The yin is sort of the feminine, it's the relaxing, it's the calming things down. So I think if the more we can bring in all of those practices, the more balance we're going to achieve in the West.
So you think it's getting rid of any trauma within inside of you? Kind of releasing everything.
Trauma's huge. When I was in the functional medicine world, and we were dealing with things like autoimmune conditions and SIRS and chronic fatigue syndrome and cluster headaches and cancers and all these things. As I continued to deal with those, the more difficult cases there that I ended up seeing, the more I realized that it always came back down to the same stuff. It was the way people were living. In other words, their lifestyle needed adjustment. They didn't understand that circadian rhythm matters, that they needed to be thinking about their drinking water. And there's just so many things in our modern world, the lighting and all this stuff. So that was one component. Another huge component is movement. We don't move enough. And the people who do move, I know you're into the fitness world, there's a lot of people think that you have to be this gung-ho, hardcore person.
Right.
If you love fitness, then do fitness. But if you're somebody who just doesn't love like high intensity interval training and marathons and powerlifting and all this crazy, then don't do it.
Do whatever you want. Yeah.
You can play, right? So I think there's not one way to do exercise. It has to be fun. So I think bringing in more fun movement practices. It can be hiking, it can be playing with your dog, playing with your kid, but bring in more movement that you enjoy, not this stressful boot camp style.
Yeah, not like I have to do this.
Yes, that you hate, right? Just to get your body moving. I don't think that's a healthy thing. So bringing that in, and then a huge part of it was traumas, emotional traumas. That and there's a study that goes back to the CDC and Kaiser Permanente that was called the ACEs study. It was Adverse Childhood Events is what that stands for. And they simply, it was actually a weight loss study originally. And what they did was they took all these, I think it was mostly women, and they did a weight loss study, and they found out this certain portion of the women just dropped out. They didn't even complete the whole experiment. And so they thought, well, why is that? Why did these people, just drop out of the whole program? And they realized that a large portion of them, they had a higher proportion of childhood traumas.
Wow.
In their life. And so they just sort of looked into this. So they sort of fell backwards into this study. And, they expanded this and actually made it its own study to look at how childhood traumas might correlate with life events. And what they realized, yes, of course we would suspect that it would increase things like drug abuse and alcoholism and, these type of things, sexually transmitted disease, all this sort of behavioral stuff. And sure enough, it correlated. But what they were surprised by was that the childhood traumas, and this can be parents divorcing, it could be, of course, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, it can be a parent getting incarcerated, it can be, adoption, all these sort of things. I mean, it can be even a baseball coach that was too aggressive when you were 10 years old, right? There's a lot of things as children that we deal with that we may not label as trauma, but really for a child's sort of emotional, capacity is trauma. It could be breastfeeding, like I said, that was ended too early. Lots of stuff. The more childhood events that they witnessed, they correlated very strongly with things like increased incidence of Parkinson's disease, increased incidence of obesity, of diabetes, of heart disease. And so you start to see all these chronic diseases start to really, really ramp up the more adverse childhood events that people reported. And they didn't even really do an exhaustive list of adverse childhood events. They left out a ton. In fact, they just used a short list, and they still noticed a really high correlation. So there is a lot that happens when you have these adverse childhood events that lead to developmental trauma, which change behavior, which change the way you think and feel and emote and interact with the world. You may not be able to connect with somebody because at an early age you had to, you developed in this aggressive pattern that you had to do everything yourself, so you kind of became this loner, which is fantastic because you develop all these great skills on how to solve problems on your own, but you're unable to connect with people. So there's lots of things like that. But what's most fascinating to me as I looked into this more and more is that these childhood traumas, and all traumas really, it doesn't have to be in childhood, they actually get held in the body. And Chinese medicine and some of these Eastern philosophies have known this for years. Anger and bitterness tends to be stored in the liver, right? We store lots of energy in our hips and emotions in our hips. So this is what's fascinating. In modern sort of biophysics or biological research is showing us that this is the case, that we actually are storing traumas in the body. And there are ways to release these traumas. There's things like emotional freedom technique, also known as tapping. Again, plant medicines have been known to do this in a profound way. There's all, family constellation. There's so many of these tools. Hypnotherapy, neurofeedback to some degree can even do this. There's a lot of techniques that are able to release these stored traumas. And it's fascinating to watch if you work with a practitioner who can do this. Just working the energy, all of a sudden somebody will just start breaking down and crying. And all of a sudden this emotion just starts coming out of them. And it's not because something was said or triggered. It's really the emotion that's stored in the body that's finally moving through and coming out of them. So it's fascinating. It sounds weird, but when you actually see this and experience this, all of a sudden you realize, wow, there is a ton of sort of energy that can be stored in our nervous system. And we have to realize that our nervous system goes far beyond our brain. The nervous system is our brain, it's our spinal cord, it's our enteric nervous system, which is the gut, right? Your heart has neurons, tons of neurons. So we have a nervous system. We have the vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the gut. And we have all these sayings, right? Trust your gut.
Yes.
Well, that's the nervous system. That's this sort of feeling, this intuition that comes from the gut. That's probably coming from the nervous system. Follow your heart. Well, your nervous system. Those are the neurons. There is sort of this weird thing that we have that goes beyond the brain and the thinking. So it turns out that a lot of this stuff is stored in the body, and it can be in the fascia, it can be in the DNA, it can be in the nervous system. And we also know that traumas can be passed down through generations. Wow. So if you had a grandmother that was, a Holocaust survivor, that trauma that they experienced through the Holocaust can actually be passed down through generations. And science is bearing this out. They're bearing this out in mouse and rat studies. They're bearing this out in now human studies. In fact, one of my favorite studies shows that when you take a mouse and you I think it was a scent of lavender. They had this scent of lavender and they shocked the mouse. So essentially, the emotion of fear and paranoia, essentially of being shocked, was associated with the smell of lavender. Wow. And the mouse or the rat then had pups, and the pups had never smelled lavender, and they'd never been shocked. And yet, when they smelled lavender for the first time, their nervous system spiked. So in other words, this information, which is brilliantly passed down as a protective mechanism, is now passed down to the pups, saying, hey, lavender is associated with getting shocked, so be aware. So we can see this in studies. It's fascinating to see. And we still don't know exactly how this is passed down. Again, it could be DNA, it could be nervous system, it could be the fascia, it could be water, it could be a lot of things. Or it could be, more esoterically defined in terms of spirit or field or however you want to think about it. So the reality is that we know this is the case, and it bears out over and over again. And, some might say Catholic guilt is one of those things that we can look at, and I kind of joke about that with my Catholic clients. There's all kinds of this stuff, and at the end of the day, a lot of it's not our fault, and it doesn't have to be something that we hold on to. It's just part of our patterns, things that we are experiencing that we get to move through and release, and a lot of that is profound and very valuable to us because it propels us on sort of a spiritual path or a path of alignment with who we really are, because we move through these things. And without these challenges, there's no real incentive for us to improve, to better ourselves.
That's true,
right?
yeah.
So just like in the gym when you're facing something difficult, or when you're on the 25th mile of a marathon, that's the challenge. And as you move through that, there's real reward on the other side of it. So we need these sort of hurdles in our life to be able to overcome them and I think grow. And so we grow spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally through these challenges. And sometimes they're not ours. Sometimes they're passed down through the family, and we get to resolve them.
That's interesting. So you think it's possible that chronic diseases can be passed down from just your parents' trauma that's passed down to you?
Absolutely. And I think there's a number of ways, right? There's the actual trauma that can sort of physically be stored in the body. I think there's also the trauma, like if my mom experienced some sort of childhood trauma or even was passed down to her, and that then results in some sort of behavior, right? Let's say she's kind of maybe aggressive, or she's maybe withdrawn, or whatever her personality becomes as a mechanism to deal with that trauma or that issue from a young age, that develops personality. We actually find this in successful people. A lot of highly successful people, getting straight A's and working really hard, they actually need to succeed in order to get love. And I actually identified with this. I succeeded in school and in sports because once I did that, I got tons of love. So, right, it just reinforces the behavior. And so you can actually become sort of this type A, person that's just uber successful because that's the pattern that you learn to get love, and that becomes who you are as a personality. So if my mom is a certain way, And then of course she's raising me, and I'm sort of monkey see, monkey do. As a child, I'm experiencing my mother in this way. Then so I'm not only getting the trauma passed down, but I'm getting the behaviors passed down from my mom that I'm then mirroring.
I can see that.
Right? So there's a lot of ways, I think, that we can adopt this stuff, and that the traumas or the things in our past can then affect us that maybe aren't even ours.
It's interesting. A lot of the times when people think of becoming healthier and things like that, they'll start with diet, things like that. And a lot of people are adopting a veganism, lifestyle.
Yep.
Do you think that's important? What are your thoughts on that?
The diet thing I think it's very important, especially now. I think we have created a food system and a way of eating that is totally unnatural, right? We are eating foods out of season. We are eating foods that aren't even foods. We are eating genetically modified foods. We have pesticides in the foods. We are eating organic foods, but they're grown in crappy soil. I mean, there's so many problems with our food system. Now, that's not to say that, we just throw in the towel and just eat whatever. But I do think it's really important to make the best food decisions that we can. And as a society, hopefully, we start to shift the focus to more local, organic, sustainable foods that are grown in healthy soils. I think this is drastically important. And we, I grew up even 20 years ago. There wasn't organic foods like we have now, so it's radically changed in a matter of 10 or 15, 20 years. The organic food scene. So we're making progress, and I think the more consumers demand this type of healthier food option, the more that the producers are going to respond to this. So I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to make individual choices and family choices and hopefully community choices. And as we do that, it then propagates a different food supply and different food system. Now, when it comes to the type of foods you eat, I think it's really overblown in terms of veganism and paleo and FODMAP and God, you name it, right? There's just so many systems out there. And what's fascinating is if you go around the world, you don't see any of this stuff. You hardly ever. I don't know of a culture that's actually truly vegan outside of Western cultures. Vegan culture is not really a thing 80 years ago or 100 years ago. And the reason is, and we experience this as we travel to places around the world, like the Nicoyan Peninsula in Costa Rica and Sardinia, Italy, and Okinawa. The reality is 60 years ago in these places, they didn't have electricity. So there wasn't this dogma. There wasn't a debate on, okay, well, I'm not going to eat this. I'm a vegan. You ate what you had around you in season, and you made decisions that made sense. So a lot of people would have a pig, or they would have fish, or they would have sheep, or whatever it would be, because that's what was around them, and that's a food supply, right? And your goal is to be healthy and keep your family healthy. And a lot of the traditions end up passing down cultural cuisines, and that's just the way they eat over time, because that's what made sense, right? That was the healthiest way to live. So we're now in a position in the West where we can sort of intellectualize this stuff, which isn't necessarily bad. And I don't demonize the paleo approach or vegan approach, but I will say none of it's actually observed in sort of the natural world or traditional world to a large degree. I think the danger does become when you get too dogmatic on something and you're trying to intellectualize something because of some philosophical belief or some intellectual belief. So if you are following a vegan approach and you are healthy and you feel good and there's no issues, then great, keep doing it. If you're following a paleo approach where you're mostly eating meat, or even this new red meat sort of diet that they're doing, then great. Like, I have no issues with that. I think everybody needs to make a decision that's based, that's based on their health and away from this dogmatic approach. Again, I think the most important thing that we need to do is go back to whole foods, organic, hopefully sustainable and locally grown. And if you can, seasonal. Like, that's really what I think is the best way to go. There was research that was done, I think, in the early 1900s, and I'm forgetting the guy's name, it's killing me, but he wrote a book, and essentially he took cadavers, right, these are dead people, and he actually dissected them and measured essentially from mouth to anus and on the table and stretched it out to look at the whole length of this. And what he found was that there was a 100% difference in length. I think it was from 20, some people had 21 feet of length between mouth and anus, some people had 42 feet.
Wow.
So, and I could be getting the numbers wrong, but the point is simply that if that's the case, that we find that people have a really varying degree of sort of digestive tract length, if you want to think about it that way, then that would indicate that some people do much better on a plant-based diet than somebody else who might be doing much better on a meat-based diet. Because the reality is, when you eat plants, generally you need more digestive tract to deal with it, right? You have to break things down more, the cellulose. Exactly. This is why cows have so many stomachs, right? So it's not that plants are good or bad. It's just do you have a system that is compatible with this type of food choice? So I think this is why we see that there is no one option for everybody. There is no one way. And even if you go back to the oldest pure food science on the planet, which is Ayurveda, which is the science of life, their belief is that everybody has a sort of natural constitution, and that their dietary choices will be influenced by that natural constitution and the seasons and the time of day. So which to me makes a heck of a lot of sense, even if you don't know anything about Ayurveda, the fact that we might think about it in cycles, and that you eat different foods at different times of day and different times of years based on who you are. I mean, that just seems almost obvious to me. Because everything is cyclical and everybody's different. So they just figured out a way to sort of map this and figure this out. And as I've gone more toward that approach of an Ayurvedic approach, it just seems to be super healthy. So I think if you can monitor your health by monitoring your stool, it's a fantastic way to see how you're digesting food, monitoring how you feel, how you sleep. Those are great metrics to start with. And let that be your guide, and really learn how to tune into your body and figure out what's healthy. Because if you're following somebody else's logical approach or somebody's scientific research or dietary philosophy, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. It may be the right track, it may be the wrong, but if you're not tuning into your body, then you're just going to keep swinging and missing.
I agree with you. I think too many people are labeling themselves. They do their research and they're like, okay, there's vegan, there's paleo, there's low carb, high fat, whatever. Okay, I'm going to go with keto today.
Yes.
And they stick to that and they're like, okay, I'm keto.
Yes.
And they won't eat anything else.
Yeah.
They will completely, eliminate everything else from their diet.
Yeah.
And it might not even work for them. They'll go a month or two, okay, keto's not working. Let's be vegan now.
Well, and here's the other part of that too, right? So you can take somebody that's keto, who's eating 90% of their diet is red meat and chicken and fish, and 10% is leaves and vegetables.
Right.
That's keto, right? Then you have another person that's keto that's eating ghee and coconut oil and bacon. And so it's like 90% fat, plant-based or otherwise, and then 10% of sort of protein and carbohydrates and natural sources. Then you can have the other type of paleo or keto, which is like almost all vegetable-based, tons of fiber and very little sort of carbohydrates that are meaningful, and very little fat and protein. So within the spectrum of keto, you have a number of different approaches. And you could be somebody that's keto that's eating between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. And that's going to be a drastically different result than somebody that's eating between the hours of, let's say, 11 a.m. and 5 p.m.
There's so many factors. You're right, yeah.
And then we can talk about veganism, and we can have somebody that's eating sort of a vegan, cookie that's just full of garbage.
I hate that.
But it's plant-based.
It bothers me.
Right? And then you have somebody else who's eating, whole grains and more natural foods, fruit, and a whole wide spectrum of natural foods in season. So, this is why I think these sort of generalized thoughts are sort of almost silly to talk about. Because, again, in a vegan approach, there's going to be a million ways to do it. So, I think the nuance is really where the secret lies. And again, that's why I think the most important thing that we start with is, are you eating whole, real, organic, hopefully local and seasonal types of foods? And if you're doing that, then the spectrum of what you're eating can then be varied. And you might want to vary it per season, which is generally what I do. I eat more fruits and carbohydrate-rich diets in the summer, and I start to shift over towards more nuts and soups.
Interesting.
And sort of a more paleo-ish type of diet. And I've actually reduced my animal product intake just because for whatever reason I feel better these days doing that.
I do too, actually. It's something I've noticed.
Yeah, but I'm not vegan, and this is the hard part for me, because I'm not vegan or vegetarian, so I don't fit in that crowd. I get excluded from those people.
Yeah.
And then I'm not following a strict paleo approach, so I get excluded from that. I'm not doing high fat, so I get excluded from that. I'm not keto, so I basically don't fit in any group. Nobody likes me.
I know, it's like a little clan that they have.
So I'm just this like healthy guy having normal food, and that's really
That's good though. I always tell my clients, stick to the one ingredient foods. Try that, like apple, avocado.
Absolutely.
One ingredient. That's what's put on the earth. That's what it's, it's not made in a factory. You don't have to put a bunch of crap together to have it. That's what you should be having. But if you want to have a Snickers bar once a week, if that works for you,
couldn't agree more.
Go ahead.
My weakness is ice cream. I love ice cream. I will never not love ice cream. It's my thing. So if I'm eating, an organic Granny Smith apple in the morning with, some cucumber and carrot, like that can be a breakfast. Or a bowl of one of the things I actually been doing a lot lately is gluten-free oatmeal, organic oatmeal, and I use like wild blueberries, and I put some like mint leaf in there, and it's like the
interesting.
best. It's the best, and it's simple.
Wow, I've never tried that actually.
And that's the thing. Like, there's no rules to this game, right? I don't need a recipe. I don't need anybody to tell me anything. I feel good. I sleep well. And really, what I think for me the most important thing is watching my stool and seeing how that changes. And it's sort of weird to sort of start that practice, but you don't even need to watch it. You can just feel it. Like, when it's like a good stool.
I think everyone can relate to
watery or runny or oily, it's floating. I mean, just start to, and look at the Bristol stool chart. Google Bristol stool chart and look what it is. And that'll tell you a ton about how you're digesting food. And if you think you should be following a high-fat diet and your stool is oily and floating and it's just a mess, like, that's too much fat. Your liver and gallbladder is unable to
process it.
Cannot break that down, cannot assimilate that. So that's telling you one of two things. One, you're eating too much fat, and or you need better biliary production from bile and liver. Your liver is clogged or your liver is congested. So there's one of two things going on, and perhaps two things. You might be eating too much fat and your liver is sluggish and your biliary ducts are clogged. So, these are the signs and symptoms that we can look at to make adjustments that have nothing to do with somebody posting an amazing blog on what they did and how healthy they are when they switch to X and X diets, right?
I think most of the time, it's probably bad to say because I actually give people meal plans and stuff, but I think people can make they can be their own dietitian and
100%.
make their own plan. They don't need,
They don't, you're right, they don't. But it's very, very good to give people meal plans for two reasons. One, it allows them to be more accountable and step into the process of change, right? When we're making changes, it's so helpful to have that as a guide, as a tool, right? If I'm trying to make all these changes, it can be very tough to just say, okay, go make all your food, because I'm not used to this, right? I'm coming from McDonald's twice a week and eating out 4 times a week, and so I just need a little assistance. So it makes it easier. But then not only that, as you get familiar with cooking food, all of a sudden you don't need recipes anymore because you're like, oh, I know how to do this, and like, you just gain some confidence and you can start mixing and matching and doing your own thing. So I think the meal plan is actually tremendously important. It's something I don't do enough of, to be honest. But I think it's the easiest way to get people to change. So I think it's tremendously important.
So another subject kind of related to this, over the past 2 years you've been filming a movie. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So it's kind of studying basically all this stuff and putting it into one.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about that. It was filmed in 50 locations, is that correct?
Well, gosh, I mean, probably. It's called the Human Longevity Project, and the idea was to go around to these older people in their 90s and 100s and really investigate what it was about their life, particularly from a historical context, that allowed them to be healthy into their old age. And so, we basically just went around the world to a few places that we were confident we could find these elderly people to speak with them and interview them, and that was the goal. And then, of course, we interviewed functional medicine doctors, neurologists, nutritionists, you name it, all kinds of, spiritual type people and meditation teachers and all kinds of stuff to get a sense for what the science is telling us. So we interviewed these people in their 90s and 100s, and even one guy named Giulio who was in Italy, who was 105, still riding his bike. So when we talked to them about their lives, and the fascinating thing is that it was simple. They lived a simple life that was governed by a daily cycle set by the sun. They got up with the sun. They didn't have alarm clocks and iPhones, right? So they got up basically with the sun or just prior to the sun, and they would go work in the field, or they would go do manual labor. Some people would walk 30 miles to work or 30 kilometers to work, go to work, and then walk 30 kilometers home.
Wow.
They would bike with 200 kilograms or 200 pounds on their back to somewhere and deliver whatever goods, right? They would load a truck up with whatever. So they were working hard, and so they didn't exercise. There was no leisure. Like, this is a concept that is so laughable to them because they were working all day. And as part of their work, they would take, generally a siesta or some kind of nap in the early afternoon, and then
I'm all about the naps.
Right? It's fantastic. So they weren't sitting in a desk like we are. They were moving around doing manual labor. But they were doing things outside. They were governed by the sun. They didn't have electricity, so they didn't have overhead lighting. They operated by candle sometime when they would come home and the sun would set. It's kind of story time or bedtime, really. There was not much you did after sunset. So, they operated on normal cycles. They lived normal lives, in a more simple way. They had more time because time moves slower in that type of way. And we all know this. Like, if you've ever been to New York City, time just seems to go like a mile a minute, right? And in fact, they call it a New York minute.
Seems like in LA
right?
It does that too.
Right, exactly. It's so fast. But you go into, no-name town, Oklahoma, and all of a sudden, like, time slows down. There's this weird quality of time.
So true.
And we noticed this when we were, particularly in Costa Rica. We went to this, Nicoyan area, and like, I remember getting up in the morning, drinking my Costa Rican coffee, and like sitting there going, God, this is great.
Yeah.
You know, the howler monkeys are moving around, and this iguana's crawling up, and the horse walks by.
Oh, it's
and all this
amazing.
stuff. And, you know, I was thinking, well, it's probably 9:30. We better get to work. We better get going. And I'd look at the clock, and it was like 8:15. So like my whole like perception of time just got shifted. And it was weird because you felt like the day was longer, so you had time to walk to the store. Whereas here, you know, in Southern California, I feel like even though the weather's great, I don't have time to walk to the store, right?
Right, it's true.
I have too much to do. There's too many things happening. I got to go now, and I got to get it done.
Yeah.
So you just felt like you had more time, so you walked more. You took a different approach to life. And what was fascinating is that, you know, we were working, we were traveling, we were trying to find these 100-year-olds. We were, you know, I mean, it was not easy. So we had cameras, and we're, you know, doing all this stuff, and there was a limited time. And so it's not like we were there on vacation. And yet, when we came back to the States, I noticed as soon as I landed, I felt like I was late for something. So down there, I felt like I had so much time, and it was such a different pace. And then I come back, and it's like, oh shit, I'm late, right? There's emails, and there's texts, and there's all things happening. I got to get to something. So just that perception was fascinating to, you know, we talk about this idea of stress. Mm-hmm. Stress is actually a mental construct, right? Stress is almost a decision by the body, by the nervous system. There's things that are stressors, but one stressor might flip this person out, and this Buddhist monk over here.
It's all different. You're right.
Has no, you know, it doesn't really affect them. So it's really how we perceive the environment. And so again, their life was just different. It was so simple. They ate simple foods. You know, in Costa Rica, they would hunt lowland paca and deer, and, you know, they would have generally a pig that they would feed garden scraps to and generally slaughter in the winter. They didn't eat a ton of meat, mostly vegetables, lots of fruits when fruits were in season, whether it was mangoes or papayas or
things
what
that
have
you find.
Exactly, and they would pick them, you know, and so they just ate a more normal diet, I think, that was seasonal, that was culturally appropriate. Lots of corn, lots of beans, lots of rice. You know, basically everything we demonize here is what we found everybody was eating, right? In Costa Rica, it was beans, rice, corn, you know, lots of fruit. That was sort of the staples. In Italy, it was a lot of bread. Like, that was the staple. Bread. You did not have a meal without bread. You must eat bread. Bread is quintessential. It is, you know.
Bread's important.
You had to have bread. And so they had bread, they had cheese, they had wine, they had tomatoes. You know, they had, of course, lots of other things too. But again, those are all things that we demonize here in the West. And then in Okinawa, of course, they had, you know, things like soy and fish and, you know, all kinds of stuff, right? So I just find it funny that all the foods that we seem to think are so unhealthy here, they were, all these people that lived a long life, they were eating these things on a regular basis.
So you feel like people that have that lifestyle are the ones that live the longest?
I think, yeah.
In your studies.
They're simple. They are at peace. They have great connection with people around them. You know, we talk a lot about community, and I think this idea of community is sort of this. I think it's very incorrect to say that community is in any way beneficial. Community is not beneficial. It is the connection. Community is a quantitative thing. Okay, we have lots of people around us. Well, so what? You know, it's the connection. You know, so many people live in apartment complexes. That's community. You've got community right there. 150 people right there. And how many do you actually know? You know, if we go back to my parents' or grandparents' time, they knew their neighbors, right? They had greater connection around them. So we're losing the connection to our family members, our immediate and extended family members. We're losing connection to our neighbors and our local communities. You know, they had churches, they had groups and organizations, and we've sort of lost a lot of that. So they had a greater connection to people, greater connection to sort of God or universe or source or whatever they would qualify that as. They had greater connection to the earth and nature, to animals. So even if they were eating the animal, they had a greater connection to that animal. They appreciated the animal. They didn't take everything for granted like we do here. We take water for granted, for crying out loud.
That's true.
So
That's true, yeah.
They appreciated things. They had gratitude for things. They had connection to everything. They operated by the daily cycle, the seasonal cycle, by the life cycle. They appreciated old age. They didn't run from it. They don't think death is this thing that we have to fear. They you know, even birth was so much more natural. In fact, one of the guys was telling me that his grandmother would the stories where his grandmother would often, when she was pregnant, sneak out and like try to go have the baby by the river by herself.
Oh my, I can't imagine that.
But this was instinctual thing. She's like went to the river to have the baby, and they have to kind of go around and get her sometimes. But women have been doing this for thousands of years. This is not a dangerous thing. Now, it doesn't mean that we need to. I think, the birthing that we have here, especially with midwives and doulas and sort of the modern medicine, can actually be super beneficial. But, we also, I think, run to it too much and operate in sort of this chaotic way when we don't necessarily need to. So they just operated in a different way. And I think it was more harmonious to their entire well-being from a mental, emotional, and spiritual standpoint that allowed them to live a longer, healthier life.
So let's review it. To live past 100, to live as long as possible, your diet, your sleep, changing your environment, getting rid of trauma, maybe adopting meditation, simpler life, connection, getting within the community, which hopefully people are aware of this. That's why I think it's important to talk about it, because it seems like it's getting worse and worse with technology. So I think it's.
But again, what's the common thread in all of that is we've made things too complicated in every area. We've made diet too complicated. We've made this idea of connection and community too complicated. You got people all around you. Just go make a connection with them.
I totally agree.
We've made exercise too complicated. Do something you love and do it often. Do it in a way that's consistent throughout your life. Sleep. We've overcomplicated that. We're taking on these pills. We're trying to do all these things. All you need to do is change your lighting environment. If you're sleeping next to someone that you don't hate, that's helpful too. But you'd be surprised how much that actually matters.
Yeah.
So it's all the complexity. So if we just reduce the complexity and solve these simple problems at each phase, and just work it into our life slowly over time, then we just find ourselves to be a little bit more at peace, a little bit more happy. And I think really that's the key to the whole thing is operating from a state of peace and harmony and balance and happiness. And you're just using all these different tools to get you there.
Well, I'm interested in seeing your film that is coming out.
Thank you. Yeah.
So where can they find that?
So the first release, we actually released this first back in May of 2018. We are actually re-releasing it for free.
Okay.
In early February is sort of a little test, so we're going to throw it out there a little bit in February. So it'll be out there in February, and the big launch is going to be in May.
That's awesome. I can't wait.
It's called the Human Longevity Project, and you can go to humanlongevity.film.com.
Cool.
To just enter your email address, and we'll keep you updated on when we actually launch. But it's a 9-part series. It's free, and I mean, we have some philosophy and general things that are pretty easy to follow and fun things that we take you to these places in Okinawa and Sardinia and Ikaria, Greece, and that kind of thing. So it's fun to see those. But it gets nerdy too. So if you're sort of a geek and you really like to get dirty into some of the stuff,
some people are interested in that.
It is pretty geeky at times. So it's got a little bit for everybody.
Okay, so then where can they find you on social media as well?
They can find me at Jason Prall, just Instagram and